let's get started. Well, Michael, I'll just give you a moment if there's anybody in the waiting room there where you can get rid of that part. So, and I want to welcome everyone for attending here today, and those of you that are new, have not participated in our community of practice events or guests, I welcome you to our annual meeting. We typically host this annual meeting annually at NACDAP live, and so the last 2 years we've been doing this just like everyone else. We also just wanted to recognize our sponsors for the overall conference, and our bronze sponsors as well. It's making all this possible, and to be able to help at NACDAP out. So just to kind of go over the agenda here today, we're still on time actually. So I'm going to be turning it over here in a moment to Sarah Mills to give our keynote presentation, and I certainly welcome everyone that's a guest to stay on if you can, at least through the training needs and topics. We want to be able to get some of your thoughts on maybe perhaps some topics and different webinars that you want us to be able to try to cover over the next year. And we have at the annual meeting, we have our board elections, and we have some proposed bylaw changes that reflect our new status with NACDAP. And then Neil has some other business just about a grant opportunity and request for proposals that's up here. And then we'll try to wrap up by 3 o'clock in terms of moving forward. But I think in terms of those of you that are new here too, if you could, using chat, just basically let us know who you are, where you're from, and university or affiliation. That would be really helpful for us to be able to see that in chat, and introduce yourself. So welcome everyone that's a guest here today, and a current member as well of the COP. Just the board that we have that are on the Zoom here with us today will all be playing some different roles. I can tell you this has been a dedicated group that's been very diligent in helping to launch some of the key programs of the COP, and have been at this for a while. And we have some open seats that we'll be having the election on later in the program. So with that, I wanted to just give a brief overview of the COP. We've been in existence. We're actually in our second decade here now. We started as part of a community of practice, one of the first 10 or so that were part of the community of practice under the former E-Extension or Community Foundation now, and really focused on land use. We have over 140 members that have been working with us, and our board is representative of that membership. And then in this year, we became an official work group affiliated with NACDAP. They were serving as our fiduciary, but we moved basically to be an affiliate work group of NACDAP. And we still maintain the listserv and courses and website that's hosted by the Extension Foundation. So that's why you might still see us on that as well. So with that, I wanted to be able to introduce our keynote speaker here today, Dr. Sarah Mills. And I've known Sarah for her work here in Michigan for a while, and have really come to admire her collaborative work and innovation in moving forward. And these two institutions that are close to each other can actually work together. So that's been a real pleasure. So you have Sarah's bio here, but I did want to just point out a few things. That she's serving as a senior research specialist at the University of Michigan with the Graham Energy Futures Initiative, and working on some important state grant work that I've had the pleasure of working with her on. And her research and teaching has included renewable energy development impacts in rural communities. And she's been the go-to person in Michigan and elsewhere on some of these important aspects, but also addressing the disparate reactions of rural landowners to wind and solar projects, and how state and local policies facilitate or hinder renewable energy. She has a PhD in urban and regional planning from U of M, and a master's in engineering in sustainable development from the University of Cambridge, and a bachelor's in mechanical engineering from Villanova, from her PA connection. So the Penn Staters on the call here, you'll be glad to know that we have a Keystone State alum here. And then she grew up on a farm in rural Michigan, now lives in Ann Arbor, and she chairs the City Planning Commission. I can tell you, serving as the Planning Commission chair is like a full-time job for the City of Ann Arbor. So I admire you for that, Sarah. With that, I will turn it over to you. And Michael, I guess we can, I can end screen share and have Sarah start her presentation.
Thank you very much. When I start my screen presentation, sharing my screen, it moves all my windows around. So I think I've got you on the right window now. Thanks for that introduction, Wayne. And it's really good to see familiar faces, but also nerve-wracking because you all come with a whole bunch of knowledge of solar. So I think honestly, I hope that you'll use this to fact check what I'm saying and correct me where I'm wrong in other places. But I'll give you the plan for today is sort of give you a little bit of the shtick about why we are so gung-ho on getting people to proactively think about solar in Michigan. Talk about anticipated impacts, which I'll go over that quickly because I'm assuming that many of you know that, but kind of the ones that I highlight for communities as they're trying to sort out how solar fits in or not with their other planning goals. And then it's not all things planning and zoning, but in particular, just sort of where in our collaboration together with Wayne and Brad and Jason, I mean, holy cow, kind of some of the key things that we're working on in trying to provide guidance to communities on planning and zoning. I will keep moving. I talk a lot, but if it's small enough group and I've got it so that I can see your faces too. So if you want to stop me and raise your hand for a question along the way, that's cool. I can't do chat at the same time, so don't put your questions in chat. Okay, so solar in Michigan or in your neck of the woods. So most of the people look at this map and are like, why? And from a local government's perspective, why are we talking about solar in Michigan? Because we are not Arizona. We are not New Mexico. And when I'm talking to communities who have solar developers knocking at their door, I share this map, but particularly with this red circle around it, and highlight that this is not a 0 to 10 map, right? Like the difference in scale between Arizona and Michigan is from 4 to 6, right? And so solar panels put in place in Lansing make about 70% of the power, and those put in place in Phoenix. So we're not all that different. It is sunny enough in Michigan. But right now we don't have tons of solar. In the state, we have 103 megawatts. That's if you go by EIA's list, built through the end of 2019. There's about 200 more megawatts that are under construction right now. Those are in the places with the red stars. And actually, I did steal some of these slides from a presentation that I gave for Penn Staters before. That's why there's that weird PA connection in my bio. Sorry, Wayne. But as a point of comparison, when I gave this presentation or something similar, it's not the same. So those of you at Penn State don't feel like you were cheated out. You'll hopefully learn something new. Pennsylvania was similar a couple months ago. They had 82 megawatts built. So both places around 100-ish, but what's coming? In Michigan, we're part of MISO, so you can look at the MISO queue to see what projects are in the works. And here you can see that there are 100 built right now, 200 more megawatts under construction, 6,700 that are in the queue. That doesn't count the small projects that don't tie into transmission lines, the ones that tie into distribution. We've got about 3,000 megawatts that are in kind of the PURPA queue. And so that's a lot. And again, putting it into context, from Pennsylvania, they were in about the same boat. in terms of small and large projects, at least when I looked at the PJMQ a couple months ago. So what's on the ground right now is only scratching the surface of what's to come. I do tell communities that not everything that's in the queue will be built. We know that from kind of the energy space. But in Michigan, we have utilities have filed plans and made commitments, sometimes as part of settlements, that mean a whole bunch of this will be built. I mean, Consumers Energy is one of our big utilities alone. They are contractually obligated to put in 584 new megawatts by 2023. Again, right now we have 100 statewide. So there's a lot coming. In addition, and this is true for your states as well, like in addition to those big utility scale projects, there is also a huge growth in small scale solar. This is solar and net metering over time in Michigan. And what I tell communities is that we've got demand from utilities and cities and corporations, but there's also these huge cost reductions that are improving efficiencies and utility costs. And effectively, utilities are running their integrated resource plans and seeing that solar is possible economically, and it's possible more or less statewide in the state of Michigan. At the same time, communities are not ready. And this is why, I mean, not only do U of M and MSU like to work together, but this is why we need to work together, because it's all hands on deck. So in Michigan, in case you're not familiar, we have super hyper local zoning. So every township can zone for themselves. We developed this database to help inform where we need to get the word out about being proactive and thinking about renewables. And so we know that we have about 1,600 jurisdictions in the state that are responsible for zoning. And only 20% of them have thought about large scale solar projects. 28% have some mention of kind of small scale rooftop solar. We know then that there's solar there, they just haven't, like they're interpreting it somewhere else. Like it's just not mentioned in the zoning ordinance, which is not great practice. And so trying to get communities to be a little bit more forward thinking is my goal. In doing that, people want to know, well, what is the impact of solar going to be on my community? Like, how should it fit in? And so I think what makes solar so tricky is that it can come in all different sizes, right? I started studying energy by studying wind turbines, and like pretty much you have like the small turbine that's powering a house, you know, net metered more or less, or you have wind farms, but there's not a whole bunch, at least in Michigan, of like one utility scale turbine. But like solar is infinitely scalable. And so it means that it's viable in urban communities as well as rural communities. Power plant, kind of solar power plants can be on the scale of, you know, an acre, or this picture here is from what is currently Michigan's biggest solar farm, which is 50 megawatts, 250 acres. But there's one that's online right now that is 240. I actually have a slide later on. 240 megawatts. It spans 2,000 acres. So it's in all shapes and sizes. In case you're not uber familiar with this, the other thing to keep in mind too is just like how does megawatts translate into acres? So it's 5 to 10. It kind of depends on the scale and kind of how the panels are arranged, if they're fixed or if they're tilt. But more or less 5 to 10 acres per megawatt. And so in the Michigan context, the average project that is in our queue is 140 megawatts. So that's 700 to 1,000 acres, more or less. Why this is so hard to think about what the impacts are is that right now, the solar projects that we have on average are 9 megawatts in size. But Actually, that's thrown off by a couple of the big projects, including this one here that's in Lapeer. The median project, the median utility scale solar project is 2 megawatts. There's a whole bunch in the kind of, there's many in the kind of 1 to 2 megawatt range. So what is currently on the ground right now is not a good indication of what's coming. And that makes it really difficult for communities to think about what this might mean for them, is my impression. Like I mentioned, most projects are pretty small. So here's one in East Lansing, so kind of Sparty territory, MSU territory. It's on a retired city-owned landfill. It's 1 acre in size, less than a megawatt. It's ballasted. There's pollinator habitat and native grasses that were planned or are now probably planted. It's part of like a community-owned land. They are charging $0 for the lease. They also gave a tax exemption. So like that's currently what is available. Like that's most common of the current projects. But the projects that are coming are going to be much more like this one, which is the project that I mentioned that's in Shiawassee County. Part of it's been energized, more will go online. It's being done in 3 phases. But this one is 1,200 to 2,000 acres, depending on how you count it, 240 megawatts, 8 landowners. They're all like individual private land. It's all on private land. A big portion of the economic benefit is those annual land lease payments. The going rate in Michigan is between $800 and $1,000 an acre per year. There's also tax payments associated with it. There's lots of construction jobs because this is just lots of panels, not tons of long-term jobs, but these projects are so different. And so it's difficult for people to get their kind of heads around what this looks like. This is the slide that I spend a little bit more time on, and I see that things are going on in chat and I should probably look at it to see before I get into all of these. Let's see.
Yeah, there's a couple of questions there, Sarah. Most were kind of, Michigan specific, and some commenting about how it does change in terms of local discretion for, for allowing for regulation of utility scale there.
Yep. Yes. And yeah, Anna, I see, yeah, there are some massive projects that are going in Wisconsin. There's also big projects that are proposed in Iowa, just huge. And it's different in different states where they have a threshold of like, some developers would prefer to work with the state guidance and some want to get it in under that and kind of roll the dice with the local government. Here, it doesn't make a difference what size the project is. It's all local sited. The question about community solar, and this is where I kind of put community solar in quotes, there's nothing stopping utilities from using community solar, like community-owned solar projects in Michigan. Our only examples are really in municipal utility territory. So the project, like Lansing Board of Water and Light has more or less a community solar project. There's also a community solar project at a municipal utility up in Brad Newman's neck of the woods, in the Upper Peninsula. There's actually some legislation proposed right now that would force the investor-owned utilities to have community solar, to allow for community solar within their territories. I think it's going to be a hard sell. Like, they are super opposed to that, just as they are opposed to rooftop solar. So we'll see how that goes. But we don't have the same kind of market here that for community solar like they have in Minnesota, for example. How does snowfall impact the solar farms and development of these spaces? There's actually some active research at Michigan Tech that's looking at this. to study this in particular, and there's actually use of bifacial panels in Michigan, which make power on both the top side and the bottom side. I just toured actually this solar farm the other day, last Friday, and they're using bifacial panels, and they have an ongoing project. During the winter, the reflection up from the snow allows them to make some additional power, but also there's something about the temperature difference on those bifacial panels. They heat up faster, and the snow also slips off the top. And so that's part of what this research project is to understand the development, like how that works. But for what it's worth, there's actually like per household, there's more like rooftop solar in the upper peninsula of Michigan, which gets a whole lot more snow than the lower peninsula, in part because there's a difference in the price of electricity. So the price of electricity in the UP is much higher, so those panels pay for themselves even during the summer months more, but it is possible to, to even in a snowy environment to generate some power associated with them. Let's see. Will the large projects drive out the cost competitiveness of smaller projects? Yes. That's my sense, is that like, there's economies of scale, and that everybody's pushing for the big projects, even though often it's those smaller projects that are more compatible with what communities want. And so until there's enough opposition towards the big projects, until developers really like hit a brick wall, I think that that's what we'll continue to see. It's in some ways not all that different than like the size of wind farms too. Okay, I'm gonna totally get off track. I like answering these questions though. Farmland preservation programs, Neil, I've got a whole bunch on that because that's this last thing. So actually I'm gonna go to the slide right now that I have in front of you on what I like, how I help communities, or how I think about the local benefits and the local concerns. Because when in Michigan, where we're talking hyper local, like sure, there are global benefits associated with renewables, but helping them understand like what impacts it will have for them. The local benefits are largely economic. So as I mentioned, for particularly, and this list is really for those big projects, not so much for the smaller projects, but really for those big projects. There are landowner payments associated with them. There also ought to be tax payments associated, but I have a lot of weird research projects, and one of them is looking at property taxes for renewables in all 50 states. And I can say that like a lot of states are still trying to figure this out. Like, how do you tax solar panels? In Michigan, for example, right now they're taxed as industrial personal property, which is how we tax a lot of kind of machinery and other equipment. But there's proposed changes to that. In part, actually, in Michigan, a lot of this proposed change is driven by small solar developers who, those, again, don't have quite the same economies of scale as those large solar developers. And so they're paying more in taxes, all things considered, and so are trying to change the taxation. So I tell communities, like, there probably will be some taxation, but it's a new land use. And honestly, the State Tax Commission is just continuing to roll out guidance. They're not quite sure what it will look like. I'm just going to skip over the water quality for just a minute and keep on the like economic side and the jobs. There are I don't dispute the idea that there are jobs in clean energy. There are a whole bunch of jobs in construction, a whole bunch, but for and many times, and some of this is driven by state policy, those construction jobs can be filled by local workers. That's a lot easier in solar than it is in wind, actually. But in terms of long-term jobs, there are fewer of them. For this 2,000-acre solar farm that's under development, we were told 3, 4, maybe 5 jobs, long-term jobs, in the kind of operations and maintenance phases. And largely that's like mowing the grass. So it it will, you know, there's not tons of jobs, but there is some. And for a rural community, that might be, you know, worth it. There is active research underway, and some people are talking about the benefits that you can have, that the ecosystem services that solar may provide, by especially solar on farmland, where, you know, all of this depends on what kind of farming practices you have going on right now. But if you have some ground cover that's planted, whether it includes, and particularly it includes pollinator habitat, right? Like there's some potential benefits there, but also just at the very least, rather than tilling the soil all the time, you're going to have soil retention benefits and potentially some water quality benefits if you have fewer inputs, fertilizer inputs, pesticide inputs on the ground cover than what is currently going on. But, and there's, I'll mention this at the very end, there's work trying to quantify that and like what different kinds of plantings, what, you know, how that impacts kind of water quality. But again, solar is something that is also possible, even at a relatively large scale, in an urban environment, on a brownfield. And so I think this is one where for communities that have climate goals, that want to show taking climate action, like this is often in Michigan, their most viable path to show progress towards sustainability goals. And I should say, like, the number of communities in Michigan that have sustainability goals is very small compared to the number of communities in Michigan that don't, and don't want me showing up talking about sustainability goals, who really are thinking of renewables as economic development. So, but this is where solar does kind of fit in. In terms of local concerns, some of them are on wildlife, and I tell people, just like any construction project, like there's going to be impacts during construction, certainly, but also like you need to think about what, you know, if there are critical habitats or critical species in that particular place, like you could be displacing that. But there's nothing inherent in solar that limits that. And, you know, wildlife fencing can also like mitigate kind of some of the corridor issues, you know, preventing movement across the site. But honestly, if you've got some land that's set aside that there's not a whole bunch of tons of active use on, it could provide some habitat benefits, and that's where, you know, pollinator habitat may help. Based on some research that we've done and just being in communities, a big part of like a concern about solar is that it is a change to the landscape, which is not all that different than other land uses and kind of what you hear. I have a lot of my work on wind is trying to understand different responses, and we're seeing similar things for solar, which is a lot of opposition to solar is like, this is not why I moved here. I moved here for corn and soybeans in my fields, not for solar farming in my fields. There's also some, and even though the visual impacts are limited to kind of drive-by impacts rather than wind turbines, which, you know, at 500, 600 feet extend much farther, as developed, a lot of these solar projects can surround, you know, the 1 acre, 5 acre parcels. They're kind of developed around those parcels. And so I think that that's a legit thing to keep in mind. There's often also concerns about property values. And right now, Lawrence Berkeley National Lab is doing a nationwide study of solar property value impacts. There's some studies, one from, I think it's Rhode Island, that finds some property value impacts. Others, like more anecdotal studies from Minnesota, finds none. And so I am eagerly anticipating LBNL study that comes out to understand what that will be. But the thing that I want to talk about, because like my PhD is not in energy, it's in farmland preservation, is really this kind of last one, like wise use of land and like what impact, like what is the intersection with solar and land use? There have been proposals in Michigan, and I'm sure in some of your states, for for putting solar on forest land. In Michigan, the DNR, who manages our state forest, was contacted because they had access to transmission and some property, and solar developers wanted to cut down the trees and put up solar panels. So that's something to consider for communities. But honestly, like the most viable places for a lot of solar developers is to go to farmland. It's already cleared. Like their work is a whole lot easier there. And so I think, so there's been lots of, and in Michigan, most of the development, the 6,000 megawatts that are being proposed are on that farmland. And so what do we care about? Well, first of all, to note, there's not tons of opposition for solar plus ag, right? So this is the idea of agrivoltaics, actively growing something under solar panels or grazing under them. And there is a bunch of work that's funded by the Department of Energy to like catalog what these projects are. But the reality is like, this is not what we're seeing in Michigan. Like this is not what those 6,000 megawatts in planning are anticipated to be. And so I think it's important for communities to understand, like, if this is the only reason, like if this is the only kind of solar that would be palatable to you, like you should know, like, this is not the default. Like it's possible, but it is certainly not the default. And instead, I mean, a lot of the concerns over whether this is a wise use of farmland is of projects that are really energy centric and not thinking about, you know, other agricultural uses. So from the American Farmland Trust, you know, their report that came out a couple of years ago has just a page on energy, but they note that renewable energy creates opportunities for farmers and landowners to earn new income. So that's true whether you're talking about oil and gas development or wind or solar. But it also poses threats to farmland and local food systems. And that's largely, you know, if practiced as a energy only kind of land use. I think one of the things that it's important for communities to understand is like what exactly we mean by farmland preservation. And different communities mean different things. And so getting communities to think about what it is that they're trying to preserve. I mean, if you're trying to preserve an urban boundary, right, and to keep urban services in the city, then solar does that. Like you can't build houses on the land that the solar panels sit on. So in some ways, like, you know, that's easy. If you're trying to preserve a rural vista, like this changes that, right? And honestly, I mean, you guys know this, a lot of the farmland preservation programs that have been funded across the country are not so much about like active ag as much as like, I like this view, right? And so this is where it does change that vista, not as much as wind, but it does change that for the people that are right there. The two where I think AFT's perspective comes in and that I think are harder is these last two, which is preserving land for growing food, right? And so one of the things that you have to think about is if you see solar as a short-term or a long-term land use. Because if what you're worried about is land for growing food, then those prime farmlands are the primary, like the best places to do that. And solar could be holding that, especially in places where there's a lot of development pressure. Solar can hold that that land, and you can remove solar panels. Usually they don't have foundations, but a lot of that depends on local land ordinances. If you're requiring people to like berm or plant a whole bunch of screening or take care of stormwater management, right, and move soil to create detention or retention ponds, like that's going to be difficult for that, you know, to happen in the future. But if it's a long-term, if solar is seen as a long-term land use, then and what you care about preserving is land for growing food, then then solar would not be so compatible. And the final one is on the farm livelihoods, which I feel like is often neglected in thinking about farmland preservation, but I think is really important. So I mean, and this is where, you know, when you go back to AFT's statement, like, this does provide farmers with a new revenue stream. And honestly, at least in most of Michigan, it's more than what they can, than what landowners are getting from leasing to another farmer, or then, you know, it is helpful for like diversifying their income. It's a good revenue stream. It's also providing farming communities with tax revenues. So like which is helping the rural communities overall. So solar is a really tricky one on the farmland preservation grounds. In Michigan, we have a farmland preservation program called PA 116. It's effectively a tax credit, but it's for preserving your land from development, but it's term limited. Like every 7 years you re-up it. So it's not like really long-term preservation easements. Prior to 2019, you had to disenroll your land if you wanted to put a utility scale solar project on it, but they changed that in 2019. Now you can effectively put your agreement on pause. You can't get the tax credits anymore, but you don't have to like pay all kinds of penalties. If you maintain the existing drainage or field tile, we have a lot of field tile in Michigan. If you plant a cover crop that includes pollinator habitat, and then you post a surety bond and effectively say that like it's going to go back to the initial condition at the end of its life. The MO that I tell communities, like what this says to me is that the Farmland Preservation Office in Michigan is trying to protect the long-term farmability of the land, doing things that don't move that soil, but at the same time providing farmers with this new revenue stream. We could talk a lot of time about this one, about whether I think it's good or bad, but it is what it is. So that's the message that this is sending. And I realized like I've got a whole bunch of tips and tricks or kind of what this means for planning and zoning, and I'm doing terrible on staying on time. So I can go into those. I'm totally can send you this slides, but should we talk? I don't know like who all is in the group. If you want to talk about what we just talked about, or you want me to go through planning and zoning stuff. Wayne, I'm going to defer to you.
Yeah, I'd say we can probably continue through the slides, and then we've got about 7 or 8 minutes. So maybe get through, and then we can open it up to some Q&A. There's some questions in chat, but I would say maybe get through the slides.
Sure. So I'm not going to walk you through this. What I tell communities when I'm talking, which is the same thing that I'm sure you're all telling them, is plan first. Think about it first. Don't dive just into the zoning ordinance, which is what everybody wants to do. And thinking about how renewable energy, in this case solar, fits with your long-term plan for economic development. I tell people, like, renewable energy is probably the greatest economic development opportunity that most rural communities have had in decades. But it's not right for everybody. Like, it might not be compatible with your long-term economic development goals. And then thinking about what scale of renewable energy, what sort of renewable energy, wind or solar, at what scale and in which part of your community. For thinking about solar within your plan in rural places, I encourage them to have the conversation, because many in Michigan have this thing about like rural character or talk about farmland preservation. But again, they mean very different things. And so I encourage them to think about what they mean by farmland preservation and be consistent. So if you say farmland preservation, but in your ag districts, you allow a bunch of residential development or golf courses or airstrips, you don't probably care about prime farmland. Like, that's not your goal, right? Like, it's something else. It's probably more like the rural character, the rural vista, maybe. Those things you're not going to be able to reverse those and farm that land again. So be consistent in thinking about how you think about farmland preservation and where solar. And then also thinking about whether you see solar as a shorter or long-term land use. And then this sort of gets into the zoning side too, making sure that you're not setting requirements that are incompatible with that. If it's short-term, then you should make sure that they're not disrupting the field tile or building stormwater detention basins. or planting a bunch of trees. If it's long-term, then those things might make sense. If you see this as a long-term place for energy production, then that might make sense. For urban communities, again, I tell them this is an opportunity to demonstrate local climate action, but they're going to need to really reduce the barriers to make it cheap and easy, because the cheaper and easier place to do things is the rural community that has lots of land. So from a planning perspective, oftentimes like you need to make your opportunities within the city, you need to reduce barriers to that, because the default right now is to go into a rural area, at least in my part of the country. Where there's lots of land or little development pressure, like I wish more developers would think about brownfields, and some states are moving forward. We're trying to figure out like what the barriers are. Like I'm trying to send the message that brownfields parking lots are great places, but that's not, again, the default. Where there's lots of development pressure, you might actually want to limit solar, and we could talk more about this, but I can tell you in Ann Arbor, there was a push to do we have lots of people who like climate action and wanted to move for some solar access ordinances so that neighbors couldn't shade their solar panels. But honestly, it was a bid to like block high density development next to them. They did not want to be shaded by tall buildings. And so I think that's, and like kind of thinking about how that fits into sustainability overall is something that I think urban communities like need to grapple with. The next step is like making your zoning match your plan. I will keep an eye on time. So you can read that slide later. One of the things that I think has been helpful for us as we're, Brad, Wayne, and I have been, and Jason have been thinking through what kind of a sample zoning ordinance for Michigan is for ground mounted systems, it can come in all different scales and sizes. And so to think about it, whether it's an accessory use or whether it's a principal use, this allows for accommodating different ownership structures, including like, community solar, and effectively following, if it's an accessory structure, if it's an accessory use, you can follow the height and setback standards of that district. Maybe you decide that you allow garages in front yards, but you don't want solar panels in front yards, but start with kind of what you allow for other accessory structures. Because then whether it's in an accessory use in a residential property or an accessory use in an industrial area, you've already got some sense of how to treat outbuildings and that kind of thing. Jason actually did a lot of digging on carports and what this looks like, so this is really exciting to go into, and I'm going to point you to the report that will come out in a couple months to think about that. But there's opportunities. This might be an opportunity, honestly, to like do some other sustainability things. If you build a carport, it's going to take up some space, which means you might need to think about your stall dimensions, or maybe use this as an opportunity to like waive the parking minimum on a parking lot that has solar carports. That's really an important consideration for retrofits. In principal use, thinking about distinguishing between large and small projects, knowing that there's some small projects that might be principal use, the kind of community scale projects that would not be controversial. And can you allow those by right, where larger projects maybe you do treat as a special land use. And so setting kind of the thresholds, I think people think better in acres rather than megawatts, but that's kind of something that communities can grapple with. And then ultimately, like, we effectively, into thinking about how this fits with like lot coverage, like what's the purpose of lot coverage, and how do you measure lot coverage for solar panels that are actually usually pervious underneath them, and some of them tilt? Like, how do you measure that lot coverage? So I don't think that this one slide is too wordy. You can go back and read this one. Thinking carefully about ground cover and not specifying something that's not going to grow in the shade, but also making sure that you are not specifying something that doesn't accommodate, that inadvertently disallows agrivoltaics. for people to like farm underneath the panels, or brownfield plans, right? Like if you're very specific and you have both ag lands and brownfields in your community, like you, by requiring something that the brownfield plan isn't going to allow them to do, might be another reason that you're deterred from putting solar on brownfields, which I think most people would agree is a better use than greenfields. We've got a whole bunch of solar resources online that we put together as part of our grant with the state. And once the MSU U of M solar sample ordinance is up, that'll be here as well. And I would just say that we're building the plane as we fly it, just in terms of understanding like what the impacts are and helping communities. Like they need to have something in their books, like, but it's really difficult. We don't know what the observables are. There's a lot of great research going on. I'm sorry that this doesn't include everything that of the people in this room, but you can have the links here's just some, and we do have a program too project that's just been funded by Department of Energy to really expand kind of the work that we're doing in Michigan to other nearby states. So I'm happy to talk about that. I went over, sorry. I'll be quiet, and you can contact me. Here's my email address. Like, tell me where I'm wrong. Ask me questions. Tell me about your state.
Great, and we thank you, Sarah. And we do have a copy of the PowerPoint, and this is being recorded as well. So with Sarah's permission, we would have that PowerPoint available, and so forth. Some have asked about that. Couple of questions, just briefly, Sarah. Neil was asking about where the term solar farm came from, because we used, and know some states are using that versus utility scale, right? And then also Melissa was asking about just resources for solar on brownfield sites. Since you mentioned that, maybe we can cover those and then go from there.
Language is really fun, isn't it? I mean, in Michigan, there's some local governments who had a lengthy conversation about whether it should be wind park, wind farm, wind facility. I don't know. I don't know where solar farm came from. It's just how we talk about it, at least here. Solar energy facilities, solar energy system is what we use in the zoning ordinance, SES usually. In terms of brownfields, I had a great group of master students that did a bunch of interviews with developers and solar developers and brownfields professionals to understand the limitations and like what opportunities there were for brownfields development. And if I can, once I'm done here, I will post the link to that report in the chat for you. But you can also feel free to contact me.
Great. Well, thank you, Sarah. And yes, there's some questions in chat. Perhaps if you're so inclined to answer some of those in chat as we move along, that would be great. So,
yep.
But Sarah, thank you for excellent presentation and your insight, on this, and really being an innovator and moving this forward. This is tough. This is tough work, and there's a lot of interest that we're trying to weigh in these discussions. So thank you, Sarah.
Yeah, thank you.
All right, I think we will go back to the agenda. Let's see here, if I can share screen. Okay, you seen the chair's report on there now? Give me a thumbs up if you are. All right, good, thanks. All right, so a couple of things we wanted to just mention, and those of you that are new here for the first time, we want to get your input on training and webinars as well. But annually, we kind of give a reflective statement. I've had the pleasure of being the chair of this group over the past year. Michael Doherty, who you'll be hearing from, is the incoming chair, and we'll have an election of some new officers here coming up as well. But really, since we kind of completed a decade of work, I thought it was prudent to maybe highlight what this group has been up to over the last 10 years. And one of the signature things you heard about, we actually received an award at this conference, was our launch of the American Citizen Planner. and the American Citizen Planner Indiana as well. That's been really the most comprehensive land use training on a national level that's available out there now, with about 30 hours of training available. So you can learn more about that. Been a number of webinars that have been done. We're really proud of the new relationship that we've formed with NACDAP, and serving as our fiduciary and now an official work group. We have over 140 members that throughout the country, and when we've had some webinars, we've literally had over 100 on some in the past that have attended some of the webinars. So hopefully you'll be hearing more about some of those coming up. We had some grant work that was done. We do have a website, and we're really looking for feedback and some opportunities for others to be engaged in the work. So thanks to the board that's really been diligent in working on a lot of this, and the members that have helped support some of the activities. Just in terms of that ACP, I just wanted to mention, since that has been a big program, we have the American Citizen Planner 101 and 201 that's available through the Extension Foundation platform, for a fee, and it's can also lead to the Master Citizen Planner. That term was basically crafted in Michigan, and now we have that as available nationwide. And states can also then customize that curriculum and offer that in their respective states, like has been done in Indiana and in Michigan, and other states have been inquiring about that as well. So go to acp.extension.org to learn more about that opportunity. So with that, I'm going to just quickly turn it over to Kara Salazar, who's our board member and treasurer, and newly elected. I guess you're now our the North Central rep for NACDAP as well. So one more title for you. But Kara, if you want to say a few things from the treasurer's report, this would be the time.
Sure, thanks so much. So as you can see, we do now have a balance, which is exciting. Over the past year and a half, as we've launched American Citizen Planner and American Citizen Planner Indiana, we have a revenue share between the different entities that are responsible for it, including our community of practice. So NACDAP is our fiduciary agent. And so as we're getting the revenue in from the students, it's $200 for the full package, $100 per course. Then we have the different revenue share pieces distributed. So it's exciting that we have some funds now, and we're thinking through some different ways to use that. And so we'll have some more information soon, including perhaps some new ideas and things to do at NACDAP next year. Happy to take questions though, but it is pretty straightforward.
Great, thanks, Kara, and thanks for your role in doing that, wearing a number of different hats. So we really appreciate that. I guess on to our next topic here, and really where we want to hear some input from the members here today. The board met earlier this year, and we did a virtual strategic planning retreat. It was actually facilitated by some of the extension educators at Michigan State. Brad, who's on the Zoom here, was part of that, and some others. And there were some priorities that were identified, having the growth and recognition of our American Citizen Planner, having some consistent and relevant programming, which we really want to get your focus on here. Really active inclusive membership. We really look at the opportunity of this alignment with NACDAP to bring others, such as some of you on the call here today, Zoom, to be further engaged and expand and have a healthy budget, so we can do some interesting programming. So we'd really like to hear from you now. If you could use the chat function to let us know, what webinars or topics and training would you like to see over the next 2 years. And I know some of you are just kind of here checking us out and seeing what this group is all about. But we would love to hear, from your perspective, maybe with NACDAP as our communications partner and so forth, what topics are of interest? I mean, this has been an extraordinary year, and we're looking at 1 to 2 years into the future here. So if you could use the chat function and let us know some of your thoughts, and board members, you can weigh into. This is a good opportunity to kind of get the discussion going. So we have a few minutes, so why don't we take a moment and start using chat to maybe identify some of those topics. Great. Well, thanks for sharing, Melissa, some of the importance of rural communities to proactively plan. Yep, that's a good one. You know, pressures through the application of county zoning. Brad, you know, learn more about the difference between states and how certain land uses are regulated in those topics. Yeah, we have 50 different experiments going on around the country, and that as a land use attorney and planner, it's always fascinating to me how you can rarely make some generalizations. So that is really a good one as well. And John was sharing just some of the differences in planning and plan creation and plan implementation. Yes, I mean, we have about a dozen states that have more top-down state type planning. And one of the topics that Sarah mentioned about growth management and urban growth boundaries, some have requirements on that. Michigan's not one of those, but learning more about how those are working, very good. Gwen, some of the community reinvestment areas, historic downtown planning options, planning in coal areas, reclaimed abandoned mine areas. Yes, all really good topics. Tamara, you know, climate change planning, equity in planning, how the two are related and is very important. Melissa, on housing patterns and development of interest. I know I serve on the Michigan chapter of APA, American Planning Association, and housing issues and both supply and demand have been a really big issue over this past year. So those are all really good, you know, really good suggestions for, you know, for moving forward. And yeah, Gwen, yes on housing. It's been a national. So if you have some other thoughts that come to mind, that would be really good. Then, like Melissa, I know, and you had asked the question about farmland, or excuse me, solar and on brownfields, but yeah, brownfield development opportunities. There are certain states that have been leaders in that, and sharing some more of those resources would be really helpful, not only as it relates to our solar, but other brownfield opportunities. Yes, really good one. So if you have some other thoughts there, we certainly welcome them. And if you have some other thoughts that come up, but what we generally would like to do is have a regular webinar series. Historically, we've done, you know, a few a year, and then one at the annual meeting. So, you know, bringing in speakers like Sarah and others that are, you know, experts in the field, and then coordinating that. I know we've all been blasted with a lot of this virtual webinars over the past year, but we want to make sure that we stay relevant. All right, well, thanks for sharing on that. We'll go on to the next item, and again, still put more down if there's some others that come to mind. You know, Gwen mentioning about what communities can do for that loss of tax revenue, sale of private land to state. I know that's an issue in our state, in the Upper Peninsula. We hear that a lot, and in some other places. So yes, thanks for sharing that, Gwen. Okay. All right, well, this leads me to Michael. I'll turn it over to you, and maybe you can give us just the background on the bylaw changes, and we need to have a membership vote on those bylaw changes. So Michael, I will turn it over to you. Can't hear you. There you go.
Can you hear? Okay, right. I was looking to try to see when I was coming up, because those of you who know me, Mike knows that my laptop has got the world's noisiest fan, or at least a competitor there so what I want to do at this point is talk a little bit about the bylaws changes. These were last amended in a couple of years ago, but as has been noted, some things have changed. One of the biggest things is where we are housed. E-Extension, which is now the Extension Foundation, essentially changed its operating model and no longer supports communities of practice other than a few very tangential matters related to educational offerings. And we have been advised that those may go away at some time, anytime. So we had to find a new home. We found a new home in NACDEP. So a lot of the changes just reflects that we are now a working group within NACDEP. If you heard at the yesterday during the business meeting, we're the first, hopefully among many, that will come about. But that's if you look on the screen, we have the bylaws and they're in track changes. The first thing is literally that first change is talking about what we are, that we're now in NACDEP or associated rather than an extension community of practice. The second change is just retitling an Article 2 working group. It's changing here a reference from leader to chair. That's a technical, that's literally punctuation change. Here is giving us the right to call or handle a special election for unexpired terms, which rather than previously the board could just appoint someone. And in the case that we actually have coming up, we had someone who was very much just into the beginning of their term. So it really isn't, if it's 2 months, that's one thing, but if it's 2 years, it's something else. This is just cleaning up language and making sure that we have the numbering correct. What used to be is that we had a 9th member on the board from NEFA. Now that spot was eliminated, but we had an odd number of people on the board. So which makes it very unusual for rotation and quorum. So we just created and ensured that there'd be a 5th at-large representative. So there are now 4 geographic, 1 for each of the 4 extension regions, and 5 at-large is what we're proposing. Election of officers. We had some archaic language where terms were moved through a process of your second year you'd be able to stand for chair-elect, and third year you'd be chair, and then you'd serve an extra year when you weren't really elected to the board as immediate past chair. And we're just trying to clean that up because it while it sounds great in practice, it doesn't work very well. I mean, it sounds great in theory, it doesn't work very well in practice. So we've eliminated the necessity for someone to have already, the scheduling out of 2, 3, 4 years of a 3-year term for those positions. We also have language here, situation if someone has to resign. We now have we put a procedure in place. We have not experienced that, but I've been in other bodies, including NACDEP itself, which had someone in the leadership pipeline who had to step away. Moving forward, there's it's regional representatives, not is the actual term, not leaders. And so we also added recruitment, and there were 2 tasks in one, so they're separated there to give additional emphasis to the activity of recruitment, going through on membership. Wanted to make sure that basically we're since we are now within NACDEP, trying to make sure that people are either a NACDEP member or they've got to be approved. It's a bit of a cumbersome thing. However, but it basically, we're not going to turn anyone away, but that's just to confirm the way we're set up now. So we had to put that in place. But if you remember that NACDEP has changed its membership policies, which makes it a lot easier to be a NACDEP member than it was before. Vis-a-vis the type of appointment you must have. So again, you don't have to, while technically it really doesn't change anything, it just means the process, if you're not an NACDEP member, it's got to be vetted. But since there's always been a great amount of crossover between NACDEP membership and this group, we don't anticipate this being much of a problem. Member expectations, clean this language up, included something about marketing the COP, which was not in there before. and that's it. Again, these basically fall into two categories. One set of changes relates back to our organizational structure, that we are now housed within NACDEP rather than a community of practice of e-extension, because that no longer is a structure that's recognized or operates. So if you noticed, you heard Kira talk about during the Treasurer's report that the fiduciary was NACDEP. That's because e-extension, now the Extension Foundation, got out of that role. So we had to find somebody else to handle our money. They were not going to do it anymore. So that's what started our relationship with NACDEP. And in February, we took it to the next step and became the working group. The other is just some technical changes, either reflecting current process or just cleaning up language within the bylaws. So that is the sum of all the changes that are being proposed. Does anyone have any questions about them? And I think
well, thank you, Michael, for walking us through that and your help with the committee and making some of those changes. So I guess at this point, our bylaws state that we had the announcement of the changes a couple weeks ago, and at the annual meeting here, we can vote on those changes. So we do have a quorum. So I would offer if anyone has a motion to approve the bylaws, and then
changes.
we can have a second and then open it up for discussion. So I'll open it up to the membership floor to make a motion.
Well,
I'll make that motion.
okay.
I'll second it.
All right, so we have a motion by Peter, second by Myra, to adopt the changes as presented by Michael Doherty to the bylaws. Do we have any discussion? All right, hearing none, I guess we can do a voice vote. So all those in favor signal by saying aye. You can unmute.
Aye.
Aye.
That was pretty impressive. Yeah. All right. And then all those opposed, same sign. All right. Hearing no opposition and hearing those for, the motion carries. So we have the newly adopted and amended bylaws. So thank you, Michael, and the committee for putting that together. All right. So I think we go on to the next item on the agenda, which is our board election. So I will turn it over to Myra to explain the nominating committee process and walk us through this portion of the board meeting.
Okay, thanks, Wayne. And first I want to recognize the members of the nominating committee, and that was Anna Haynes from University of Wisconsin, Stevens Point, and Michael Doherty, who's been doing a lot of heavy lifting for this meeting from West Virginia University. So it was the three of us, and we came up with a slate. We basically had the following open positions: 2 at-large and 1 for the Western rep. And then also Andrew Newpel had been filling in for the South Regional rep position, and now is going to run for his own new 3-year term. So this is the slate that the nominating committee came up with. And basically, to go through it again, Anna Haynes at large, new 3-year term, University of Wisconsin. Brad Newman, who is from Michigan State, excuse me. And he's new to the board at large, a 3-year term. Andrew Newpel is a Southern Regional rep, and he's going to be starting a new 3-year term. And then Melissa Hamilton is new to the board. She's the West Regional rep, for a remaining 2-year term, filling out Paul LaChapelle's position in that role. And I want to thank Paul very much for his willingness to volunteer for time. And we're looking forward to Melissa hopefully occupying that position. So are there any nominations from the floor? Hearing none. Wayne, is it okay if I turn it over to you for the actual vote?
Sure, yeah, that would be fine. So what we're voting on today is for the nominating committee slate as presented, Anna, Brad, Andrew, and Melissa for the terms that have been identified. This is a majority vote, by the membership present with quorum. So we need a motion from a member to approve the slate as recommended by the nominating committee.
I will move that we accept the slate as presented by the nominating committee.
All right, we have a motion by Michael Doherty. Do we have a second?
I'll second.
All right, Neil as a second. All right, any discussion? All right, hearing no discussion, so we're voting on this. So all those in favor of the nominating committee recommendations for board elections, signal by saying aye.
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 All those opposed, same sign. Hearing none, the motion carries. So welcome our new members, Brad and Melissa, and Andrew for returning, although you probably feels new with just a few months, and then Anna. So congratulations. All right, and then by the bylaws, the new board members take effect July 1st. We have one more meeting that will take place as the lame duck session, if you will, in June. But July 1 is the official start date for the new board. Okay, so moving on, we just at this point we're doing well for time. So we have the next meeting of this board that's scheduled for June 16th. Generally been meeting like the third Wednesdays of the month. That'll change with the incoming chair, Michael, and then the newly elected board will determine its officers at the next meeting in terms of the chair-elect, treasurer, and secretary. So that'll take place by the new board at the next meeting.
Yeah.
So that's,
wait, Wayne, just a correction. The board actually changes after this meeting. The officer terms, and we then we elect the officers at our next meeting. So the officers are made up of board members. So that's the reason for the carryover. But the board that was elected today will be the board that's meeting on the 16th of June. The officer change is July 1 to July 1.
got it. See, so that's why we have our bylaws expert, Michael, on the call. So thanks, Michael, for that clarification. All right, and then Neil, I think there was some announcements you wanted to make, and that we were asked by one of our regional development centers. So I'll turn it over to you to explain that and put in chat any details there.
There is, thanks. And of course, that's when the phone rings from the doctor. Yeah, basically, we got a request to see if there'd be anybody interested in the, let me bring it up. Well, let me put it in the chat, but there's a summit on energy, and they're asking for abstracts and a lot of different subjects, one of which is land use, and a lot of other related subjects as well. So they asked if we would bring that before the COP membership and see if there's any interest in it, or please take a look at it and see if individually or some of us might go together to submit an abstract to
and
that would be related.
just to display it, I put the actual abstract, the call on screen so you see what it looks like. And then I'll stop sharing, let's bring the thing back up. So that's what the link will take you to. Sorry, Neil.
No, okay, I'm not seeing it. Maybe I'm,
Yeah, I need to stop sharing, Michael, to be able to show that. Well, let me just do the last slide, and then you can put that up. I want to thank everyone for attending here today. Those of you that were new here for the first time, if you're interested in working with us on a number of activities, from communication to webinar ideas to helping to launch American Citizen Planner in your respective state, or want to learn more about that, please let one of the board members know. We're certainly willing to be able to have more engagement. So I will stop sharing my screen, and yeah, Michael, if you wanted to put that up, that would be great.
yep, and you can click on that on the site then, if you have interest in submitting.
Yeah, so it looks like that's coming right up on
Yeah,
May
it's
25th.
quick turnaround.
Yeah, it seems really relevant to our conversation today.
Mhm.
So, well, good. Well, I want to thank everyone for attending here today, and Sarah Banis Mills for excellent presentation. We do have the PowerPoint and the recording of this that will be taking place, and we'll be looking. So I hope everyone had a good conference, and looking forward to the year ahead, and congratulations to our new board members. So it's always nice to be able to finish a little early, and we're ahead of schedule. So that's good. Unless there's any other comments or questions, I think we're done.
I'm sorry. I just
Yeah.
saw there is some chat as far as contact info for getting more involved in the COP, which is a great
Right.
thing.
And I'll put
Maybe
I want to put my email on there as well. I'm the incoming chair, so definitely we can use more involvement, and we have been focused for the last few years, as Wayne noted, on the ACP. It did win a North Central Region NACDEP award. I've been involved with awards since 2012. I've never seen educational materials team be as competitive as it was this year, because I think anything that was entered could have easily won in any other year. So but we did submit our materials, and it did receive a regional recognition within NACDEP. So I'm not sure if that was mentioned. So we can talk about our award-winning ACP program.
Yeah,
That's true. Good. That's true, Michael. We did fail to mention that, but yes, thanks for bringing it up.
I mentioned under our accomplishments, but it was perhaps not as prominent as it could have been. So yeah, so thanks for bringing that up. Thanks, Mike, for putting your email in there, and I can be reached as well. My last name at msu.edu. So thanks everyone for attending this afternoon. Enjoy the rest of your day, and look forward to future conversations, and in person next year, at the NACDEP conference. I think we're all looking forward to an in-person conference again.